Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Bleav in Bengal podcast presented by FanDuel. I'm your host, Solomon Wilcots, and we're joined by our Cincinnati Bengals insider, Charlie Goldsmith. And Charlie, after the Week 8 game against the New York Jets, I think our anticipation was that the Cincinnati Bengals would be back to 500, back in the playoff race. But boy, what a disappointment. They allowed the Jets to come from a 15-point deficit. Maybe one of the biggest fourth quarter collapses that we've seen in quite some time. Just give me your take on what you saw at Paycor Stadium with this Jets team. And man, the Bengals defense that was supposed to be better by now.
Well, Zach Taylor said he's still waiting for someone to make a play. And it's a defense whose playmakers haven't developed at the pace that they hoped. Not that that was an expectation, but it was a hope that they kind of pinned this season on. And then a lot of their older, more experienced players, you've got Trey Hendrickson hurt. You've got Logan Wilson bench. You've got B.J. Hill having a very quiet season. They don't have anything on that experience side of things to hang their hat on either. So it's a defense that's just stuck with kind of nowhere to go and no strength and no identity whatsoever.
This is a team now, and it's got to be frustrating for Zach Taylor because this was the fifth time since the start of the 2024 season where the Cincinnati Bengals have lost a game, even though they scored 30 or more points on the offensive side. And yet it happened again at Paycor Stadium against the Jets team that couldn't get out of its own way when it came to a passing attack. All of a sudden, their offense comes alive, having a season-high 39 points was the most they've had this season, 500 yards total offense, the most they've had this season, and 250-plus rushing yards for the New York Jets against the Cincinnati Bengals defense.
It started with tackling. It started with angles. It started with pursuits. It started with guys just being there. They're in the right call. They're in position to make a play, and they miss. And that can't happen in the NFL. It can't happen against a Jets offense without real dynamic playmakers. It's funny, it's not like Justin Fields was the one making you miss in space. It was, their backup skill position guys, and the Bengals couldn't tackle. That's been a theme for a month now, and it's not getting any better.
We should let people know that New York Football Jets came in a winless team at 0-7. It was a week that saw their owner, Woody Johnson, just lambaste the quarterback in Justin Fields. They were thinking about benching him, except the backup quarterback, Tyrod Taylor's hurt, even though he threw 2 interceptions in their Week 7 loss. And they didn't know if Justin Fields would even be able to play at a mediocre level, let alone this great performance that we saw from him yesterday. He's now gone, 160-plus passes attempted without throwing an interception. The defense for the Bengals couldn't get a turnover yesterday. At what point now will they start to maybe realize this isn't a defensive coordinator problem? I can't even begin to point at Al Golden, who I know is a really good coach. And Charlie, I said this last year. I thought Lou Anarumo was a good defensive coordinator. I still think he's a good defensive coordinator. I think at some point you got to get beyond who the defensive coach is and start to look a little bit more microscopically at the issue.
And that's the point I think you really definitively arrived at after the game on Sunday. Even like I mentioned, the old and the young, but there are guys who should be hitting like the sweet spot of the prime of their careers. Your Cam Taylor-Britts would be a perfect example. Miles Murphy in year 3, Joseph Osai in year 5. And none of it has really clicked and popped the way the Bengals planned. And I keep using that word plan because they had a plan, and then what is it? A plan until you get punched in the face. And the Bengals have found out that the plan that they expected to solve the defense in 2025 wasn't the right one.
0 sacks in the Week 8 game against the New York Jets, against an offense that had been so struggling. And yet they found an opportunity to get healthy, get right against the Cincinnati Bengals defense. Trey Hendrickson ended up leaving the game with an injury. I know I saw Shamar Stewart back in the lineup. Why no pass rush for the Cincinnati Bengals defense?
Well, we've been asking that question for 3 years now. Shamar Stewart has a lot of technical stuff that he's got to clean up. Miles Murphy just needs to play faster and get downhill more. Chris Jenkins hasn't developed as a pass rusher at the rate the Bengals wanted to see from him. Osai has had his kind of peaks and valleys, and he hasn't been a player at any point in his career who has screamed consistency. And so then you take Trey Hendrickson out of that mix, and there's no one for defenses to really have to key in on. Like, there was a play, I Bleav, where I want to say it was Murphy was blocked by a tight end, and the tight end just took him out of the play. Like, you're seeing defenses not have to game plan around these pass rushers outside of Trey Hendrickson when Hendrickson's injured.
Well, we should let everyone know that obviously you can take control of your data and keep your private life private by signing up for Delete Me now at a special discount for our listeners. Get 20% off your Delete Me plan when you go to join deleteme.com/pro and use the promo code PROPRO at checkout. It's the only way to get 20% off. And then all you can do is just go to join deleteme.com/pro and enter the word PRO at checkout. That's join deleteme.com/pro using the promo code PRO. The Cincinnati Bengals led in this game going into the fourth quarter by 15 points, 31-16. I don't know about you, Charlie. I was feeling pretty good that they were getting ready to get back to 500. And then it just, in the fourth quarter, critical moment in the game, the whole thing just collapsed. The Jets would score after punting on their first possession in the second half. They scored on 4 straight drives. And that's why I think Zach Taylor saying, I'm still looking for somebody to make a play so that we can get a stop. But it just did not happen in the second half. It did not happen in the fourth quarter. They couldn't tackle Breece Hall running down the sideline. The winning touchdown pass was not made by the quarterback. It was made by the halfback on fourth down. If I had any hair, I'd be pulling it out right now. This was an amazing, uncanny experience in the fourth quarter of that game yesterday. We saw some things that simply were not supposed to happen.
And it started with, the fundamentals that they've tried to pinpoint and adjust and make corrections with behind the scenes and in meetings. But then at the end of the day, you still have your linebackers and your safeties, their tackles and their angles not being at a starter caliber level. You have guys, having individual plays where either they look like rookies or they remind you that they're rookies. You have a pass rush with, like we said, no one that you have to really game plan around. And the Jets were kind of just imposing their will with an offense that didn't even have really any standout skill guys who the Bengals had to game plan for. They were just taking what was there.
Man, they exactly did that. It was very surprising. I will say this because I want to be positive, at least at some point. While we're recording and looking back at the game that was week 8, the Cincinnati Bengals lose to the New York Jets. The winless New York Jets come to Paycor Stadium and get a win, 39-38. It was one of the most shocking games around the National Football League on the week 8 schedule. But the positive thing is this, Charlie. Cincinnati Bengals scored a season-high 38 points in this game. Cincinnati Bengals rushed for a season-high 181 yards on the ground. The Jets' defense was not the problem coming into this game. They have a pretty, reputable defense, but yet the Cincinnati Bengals were able to win when it came to controlling the line of scrimmage in the run game for the second straight week. We go for over 140 yards rushing. Chase Brown looked good. Samaje Perine, some rugged running. I think he had a 32-yard touchdown run. That was very impressive. In fact, Cincinnati Bengals averaged 7.9 yards per rush attempt against the Jets on Sunday and had 3 rushing touchdowns. That's the silver lining in all this. If you had to find one thing that you're pleased about, the Bengals were one of the worst rushing offenses during their first 6 games, and over the last 2 weeks, they become one of the best.
The Joe Flacco offense is evolving and adjusting, and you're seeing the process that you'd expect after your quarterback, joined the team in early October. you learn, you build off different things, you add different concepts, you take advantage of the strengths you have. The line is playing better with a couple specific exceptions at the very end of this game, but on the whole for the last 2 weeks, you like what you've been getting from the Bengals offensive line. And then Brown and Perine, they're just two good players. Like, say it however you want, but these are guys who make guys miss, guys who are dynamic, guys who are electric, guys who can make plays, in the run game or the pass game. And the Bengals have really creative ideas to feature that.
Usually when you have a 15-point collapse, you have a 15-point lead going into the fourth quarter, it's not just on the defense. We're going to talk a little bit more about the defense too. And as good as we talked about with the offense, as good as they were, do you know in their last 2 possessions, they had a net gain of 14 yards on their last 2 drives. And they were really good. I mean, they were cranking it out. And when we got into the second half, the Bengals scored they punted, and then they had 2 straight touchdown drives. But on the last 2 possessions, last 2 drives, 9 plays, 14 net yards, Charlie. What's the conversation like in the Bengals organization in terms of how they can be better during those critical moments? This is an offense with firepower in Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. We talked about the run game being very productive, but at a critical moment where they needed one more drive, one more play, right, to get a field goal. They end up losing by 1 point, 39-38. They could not make it when they needed it.
This is a reminder that you need a quarterback who can make plays happen outside the pocket, make plays happen on the run, a quarterback who, and I know that Flacco's had moments with his legs, twice, but a quarterback who can more consistently do that. Like, that showed up, I believe, on 3 of the plays on the last 2 drives, plays that Flacco kind of needed to just extend, because when the Jets double teamed both Chase and Higgins and kind of the quick, immediate one-on-one matchups weren't there, Flacco either had to force it, it ended up being Diosavash, and his throws weren't fantastic, or he tried to move and he just wasn't able to kind of get away from the pass rush. So there you saw some of Flacco's speed limitations, elusiveness limitations, and that's not his game, but it's a card you have to be able to play in these really high leverage moments.
Well, this is the Bleav in Bengals podcast presented, I should say, by FanDuel. And of course, this segment is brought to you by heroes.com. That's right, heroes.com. You can go to the website. We want you to get your own tumbler, Bleav in Bengals tumbler, for your hot drinks as we go into the winter. Also, it keeps drinks really cold. Just go to heroes.com. It is a lifestyle brand. That's right, for everyday heroes who live their lives with high quality. So go to heroes.com. Think about this, Charlie. Joe Flacco has been good for this offense. In the 3 games that he's led Cincinnati Bengals offense, they've scored, 30 points in back-to-back weeks, by the way. And in the 3 games, he's thrown for 7 touchdown passes, no interceptions at all. He's protecting the football, making good choices. He's not taking a high volume of sacks. This guy gets rid of it very quickly. I love the fact that the ball comes out of his hands quickly. And he allows Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, he's allowing the weapons around him to make plays. So how can they better leverage the way that he's played? He's not Joe Burrow. He's not going to make plays with his legs. He's 40-plus years old, right? How can the Bengals better leverage what he does for the offense and what he does for the team to translate these games into more wins? Or is this a case where, hey, he's doing everything that he can do, and it's about getting better around him in other areas?
I think the defense can't just allow 39 points again. I think Flacco did his job. I think the offensive coaching staff did its job in terms of coming up with a strong game plan, with the ways they featured the run game, with the success they had on the ground, with how that built off some different ideas they had in the passing game. I don't have a ton to complain about. Obviously, they scored 38 points. There was a lot to like on offense for the Bengals this week, and Flacco continues to really marvel with how he's picked up this offense on the fly. But it's just, they have to play a certain type of game when you can't count on your defense to get a stop.
Cincinnati Bengals defense allowed the Jets to score on 7 of their 10 drives, Charlie. That's a 70% scoring drive percentage for an offense that was ranked near the bottom of the league when they came into Paycor Stadium on Sunday. That's why, to me, I think it's quite alarming. What's your sense of the conversations being had at Paycor Stadium in terms of the defense? Because, look, I'm not pointing this at Al Golden. At some point, you got to tackle. At some point, you got to get off blocks and be able to get to the quarterback. At some point, you got to be able to cover. Cincinnati Bengals did not have one sack in this game. They did not have one takeaway, one turnover in this game. These things are really about effort, energy, and enthusiasm, not about schematics. Let's be clear. This isn't about scheme. This isn't about how the game plan was drawn up defensively. We always say that in big-time moments, think players, not plays. And that works on both sides of the ball. At some point, when you're allowing a team like the Jets that couldn't get out of its own way prior to the Week 8 game, and now all of a sudden they become an explosive offense. This isn't about the defensive scheme by Al Golden. It's about the 11 guys who you simply expect to be able to live up to their promise and potential.
And there aren't big, like personnel changes that they have the ability to make right now. And you look at depth that doesn't give you a ton. So what it is just kind of the long process of player development. You ride these guys, you make one correction here. You hope it's 5% better next week, 10% better the week after that. That's not fun. That's not ideal. That's not where the Bengals hope they'd be at this point. But because of how young they've gotten, because of the way they've decided they have to build this defense through the draft, and the hope was that Al Golden would bring player development as a strength. Well, he still can do that, but it's not going to be this accelerated pace. And that was the reminder that the Bengals have been given.
At what point do you think they're now starting to reevaluate the talent, the players? Last year they said goodbye to Lou Anarumo. He's doing a wonderful job in Indy, by the way. They have the best record in the National Football League through 8 games with a 7-1 record. I think they know that Lou Anarumo is a really good coach, right? And you could say whatever you want. You can have whatever evaluation you want of him. But now I think at some point, and that's what I'm asking you, at what point do they are starting to reevaluate their decisions and some of the decisions they made in the draft and the hopes that they had on some of these young players hitting their stride during the 2025 season?
Well, because of how they've situated their cap and a bunch of the finances and the behind-the-scenes stuff, they concluded that the only player they could add through free agency to the defense was going to be nose tackle TJ Slayton. So considering that's what they did last year, and these salaries for your star skill position guys and Burrow aren't going down, it's not like they're going to go up. It's not like they're going to be able to go out and get an entire new starting defense in free agency next year. So yes, ideally you're able to reevaluate and bring some different types of players in and turn things over. But these are the investments the Bengals made. This has been what they've determined is the only way to add impact talent through the draft. And because those are the bets that they've made, they're not in a position to turn over the whole defense year over year.
Wow. This is a situation you're just going to have to ride it out, continue to coach, and hope that the players you have continue to grow, develop, and eventually will blossom. Seems like the 2025 season is going to be a painful one. It's going to be part of a lot of growing pains that can still yield good fruit. And I'm still hopeful that many of these players will begin to blossom. One last question. We saw the Week 8 game against the Jets. Trey Hendrickson left with an injury. His name has been part of a lot of different trade scenarios. The Bengals phone has to be ringing now, providing he's healthy. Next week, Tuesday, November 4th, is the trade deadline. How involved you expect the Bengals to be in this trade scenario? Either with their phones ringing off the hook. I don't expect they're going to be making a whole lot of calls, but I can see a lot of people calling them about some of their talent.
Yeah, but they've never made that type of move in their history, and yet in the Hendrickson injury, and it makes it a complicated needle to thread.
It really does. Look, it's time now for our segment to look ahead at Week 9 coming up next week, and of course, that segment is brought to you by Anjanette Friends and the people at Sipsey Klein for all of your real estate needs in the tri-state area. Just use the promo code at the bottom of the screen to get in touch with this lovely lady at Sipsy Klein, whether it's commercial, whether it's residential. Of course, she knows all the playmakers in the business of real estate. She's a playmaker herself. So use the promo code and don't forget to contact her for all of your real estate needs. Looking ahead at week 9, the Cincinnati Bengals are going to host the Chicago Bears, who had won 4 straight games prior to losing to the Baltimore Ravens at M&T Bank Stadium week 8 on Sunday. But yet it is a team that's capable of putting up points. They have a talented roster, and their head coach, Ben Johnson, he expects a lot of his second-year quarterback, Caleb Williams. What do you think about most as you see the Chicago Bears coming to town to take on a Cincinnati Bengals team that's really in a must-win scenario moving forward?
You know, the Bears are a team that has some similarities with the Jets. Obviously, there's more talent. But you look at kind of the speed and athleticism and aggressiveness that they can establish with the run game, and then a mobile quarterback who can build off that. And you know, the Bears seem to still be in searching phase in a lot of ways offensively, but they're dynamic. They have depth at receiver. They have depth at tight end. Their corners are banged up, and that's kind of something the Bengals hope they can exploit. But ultimately, they're just going to have to tackle, and that again will be the story of the week.
Hey, I'm going to tell you right now, Chicago Bears are going to come in here wanting to run the football. There's no doubt. Ben Johnson, who had been with the Detroit Lions over the last 2 years, remember you had the running back combination of David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs. They're used to pounding the rock with the run game, and there's been a resurgence for running back DeAndre Swift under his running back coach, Eric Bieniemy, where this guy's now taking his game to a whole nother level. And Ben Johnson wants to run the football, so we're going to have to tackle. They do have depth at tight end and Colston Loveland, as well as Cole Kmet, and then talent at the wide receiver position with DJ Moore and guys like Rome Odunze, who is still playing at a very high level. Do not write off a Bears offense. That might come to life when they come to Paycor Stadium. All the other offenses have done that. Over the last 2 games, by the way, the opposing offense has scored over 30 points against the Cincinnati Bengals defense. We simply have to improve in that area. And this game is going to be the last before we go into a bye week, Charlie. What do you think the focus is going to be for Zach Taylor and the Cincinnati Bengals coaches going into this game?
Yeah, probably, how they kind of capped off the day yesterday, who's going to step up and make a play, who's going to rise up and lead this defense. It's a week where it's kind of a blank canvas for different players to try to take charge in those areas. And that's kind of been the charge to those guys coming from the coaching staff.
To think the Bengals could be sitting here today at 500 at 4-4. It's like this one game at this point of the season, it weighs so much, right? There's a lot depending on it. Because at some point, as team evaluators and as you're building out your roster, if you're going to the playoffs, it looks a certain way in terms of the things you're doing on the day-to-day. And if you're not, then there's another mindset, right? Where do you think the Bengals are? Are they still hopeful? Are they still mindful? I know had they won against the Jets and they were 4-4, I know they'd be thinking, what can we add to this team? How can we get it better? And now with that loss, as we get this close to the trade deadline, not that they would be overly robust and operating in that mindset, but things have to be a little bit different now as we get that closer to the trade deadline.
Yeah, and they're looking for things to be different. This is a week they're gonna try to look for a spark, look for something to change, look for a guy to step up. It's one of those weeks where it's a big week because you want to feel like you're on the verge of finding something heading into the bye week.
You're also going to give guys more of an opportunity. And one last question, Mitchell Tinsley, when does he start to get an opportunity to play on this offense? He was so good during training camp. When does guys like him, or maybe there's someone else I'm not mentioning, do you start to see them rotating guys in to give them more of an opportunity?
Yeah, they already did that with Barrett Carter. A problem is they don't have a ton of those guys on the depth chart. Josevich didn't make the 2 plays at the end in the fourth quarter. I didn't think those were good balls by Joe Flacco. Yoshi kind of got crushed on both of those plays. And then looking across the roster, either they're already playing the young guy at guard, at defensive end, at linebacker, or there's not a whole lot of proven anything with the depth behind them.
Yeah, got to keep just trudging along with the players you have, looking to get better play and more development out of the young players that you have. And look, Andre Yosivas is a really good player. You love to see him come through in those opportunities, but I agree with you. There could have been better throws, and it was good coverage as well. Charlie, we want to thank you yet again for helping us to part the clouds and see a little bit better in terms of how the team is performing. Hopefully they get better. Week 9, as the Chicago Bears are set to come to Paycor Stadium. We want to thank you for joining us. We want to thank everyone for joining us right here on the Bleav in Bengal podcast presented by FanDuel. We'll see you next time, everyone.